Atlay woke up in the middle of the night feeling natural urges that called for the privy. He looked around and found that the entire family was sleeping, including his father. He wasn't too keen on going into the dark by himself, especially in an unfamiliar place. Wishing just to get it over and done with as soon as possible, he decided not to dress. Shivering with cold, he got out of the tent and saw that the fire seemed to go out a long time ago. He found it odd since he figured that even if his father went to sleep straight after them, there should still be some pieces of smoldering coal left. Instead, it looked like the fire was out for days. Suddenly, he felt the presence of someone else. He spun around to see who was behind him and froze with fear that he could not explain. It was not just a childish fear, not even a fear of a boy who'd been thrown into a nightmare. This fear ran much deeper. In the place that connected Atlay's soul to his ancestors, back to the time when the first man brought evil into the world, creating a hole that remained in every man's soul from that day onward. Atlay was looking at the figure which looked like a man. He was all dressed in black, sitting on a raven horse, and even though he was no more than several feet away from Atlay, he could not make out the rider's face. It looked like his head dissolved into the night, yet somehow Atlay was sure that the rider was watching him, and he felt the fear of every man that was born into this world from the beginning of time. Just when Atlay thought that he himself would lose himself to the darkness of that hole, he woke up. He didn't scream, he didn't leap up, he just lay there silently, still not sure what would happen to him, like a man who stopped an inch short from the edge of a cliff balancing on the edge, not knowing whether he'd fall or not. He stayed like that for quite some time, until finally he could regain enough strength to crawl outside, where he felt his stomach turn, pushing out everything he ate last night. He heard his mother screaming his father's name. He looked up and saw her running to him. A moment later, he felt her holding him, asking what was wrong. The dream was fading now, but even a distant memory of it sent such a wave of horror that he vomited into his mother's lap. He wanted to apologize, but he couldn't speak. With an effort, he tried to bring his sight to focus and saw his mother crying. His father leaned close to his face. "What's wrong, boy? Tell me what's happening. Where does it hurt?" How could he explain? He had no words for what he saw and for what he felt. He wouldn't be able to describe it even if he could speak. Atlay suddenly realized that it was not just a dream. No dream could do this to him. Even nightmares, as horrible as they are, have some sense of the surreal. This dream was too clear, like a message. And if it was, what kind of future would be preceded by such a message? With that realization, Atlay fainted. Atlay's fever broke on the second day from the morning it started. Leela hasn't left his side for all of that time. She didn't sleep. She ate only what Aisha brought her, and she only stepped outside a few times for a minute to leave for the privy. Only now she felt how exhausted she was. It came to her after the feeling of the relief when Atlay's fever broke. It came to her after the feeling of the relief when Atlay's fever broke. All the tiredness poured into every inch of her body. Most of it was the result of an emotional exhaustion from the constant worry for Atlay. Unfortunately, her relief didn't last very long. Almost straight away, she remembered that they have no food or water. Ahmed left yesterday to the nearest village for supplies, and she was very much reluctant for him to go, leaving her by herself with the kids. But he insisted that that was the only way. "We have enough water for a day. By then Atlay's fever should break and he'll need everything to gain his strength back," Ahmed tried to persuade her. "But why can't we all go? We'll put him in the cart and the rest of us will walk. We can make it in a couple of days. I know it'll be hard with little supplies, but we can manage." "Don't be foolish, Leela. You and the children won't make it without water. If we walk, all of it will go to Atlay, and even for him it might not be enough. Besides, people in fever need as little disturbance as possible. Moving Atlay in the cart could be too dangerous, you know that. Stop being so scared. I'll be back the next morning at the latest. No one's passed us since we've been here, so you won't be bothered by anyone." Leela knew all that, but something was telling her that they should risk it and go together. But Ahmed's tone told her that his decision was final, and she knew that arguing with him would be pointless. "He's gone all night, and most of the morning now, but he should be back any minute. Leela had a very strong feeling that something was wrong. The question was, what was she supposed to do now? Should she wait for her husband or try to get to the village herself? Since Atlay's fever broke, I guess it's safe enough for him to get into a cart and start moving. The moment she thought that, she heard her older daughter shout for her in a frightened voice. She ran out of the tent and straightaway saw what scared her daughter so much. Approximately half a mile away, a group of riders, about 50 of them, were heading their way at full speed. "Are those raiders?" asked someone. "No, little one, there's no reason for raiders to be here." Aisha looked at her mother with frightened but hopeful eyes. Leela tried to look as calm as possible, although she was terrified. "Go inside to your brother, both of you." Maybe it was possible to talk to these men and convince them that her husband could pay if they waited for him. The riders were getting closer, and Leela was standing, waiting for her fate, knowing that there was nothing she could do. Ahmed was making haste. He needed to get into the village as soon as possible because not only his son's health was at stake, but he also hated the idea of leaving his family alone, as much as Leela hated for him to leave. That's why he spared no strength in pushing his mule forward at full gallop, and by the time he rode into the village it was barely alive. The village looked like hundreds of others Ahmed had been through in his traveling days. About 150 houses lined up, making 2 streets towards the central market, and that's where Ahmed headed. First of all, he needed to find a stable, and that was his first priority. After that, he needed to find a fast horse to get him back to the family as soon as possible. The mule he rode in on would not make another mile, and he would have to leave straight after he got supplies. The stable was not too hard to find. Usually it was located on the outskirts of the market because the horses are the first and the last things people buy. This market was no different from any other. In the stable he found only one man who was leaning against the doorframe looking outside. Ahmed approached and asked, "Are you the owner?" The man looked him up and down, then looked at Ahmed's mule and said, "I certainly am, but I don't buy mules, and even if I were, this one looks like he's going to pass. Have you been riding him long? Where have you come from?" Ahmed ignored the questions and said, "I'm not selling, I'm looking to buy." The man's face turned from mild contempt to the most hospitable smile in an instant, and even Ahmed, who knew his fair share of tradesmen, was aware of how many faces they could have, was incredulous of how fast and completely the man's manner changed. Knowing that this one would be hard to bargain with, Ahmed cut to the chase. "Give me your best horse for the price you're asking, and as long as you won't try to cheat me, I will not bargain. But let me warn you, I know horses. The first attempt you'll make to cheat, you'll lose my trust, and I don't have time to give out a second chance. Do you understand what I mean?" The man's face hardened. "I understand. Come with me." He led Ahmed to the back of the stable, where he showed him a magnificent animal. "This is going to cost dearly." But money was not on Ahmed's mind. To buy this horse he would have to sell one of the stones, and that meant to risk drawing unnecessary attention. What bothered Ahmed even more was the fact that he would need to come back to the village with the family, and at least one person in here would know about his fortune. On the other hand, he was much too eager to get back to his family, so a horse would be handy. He finally decided, sooner or later I'd have to sell one of them. So he asked the tradesman, "How much?" "This is the finest horse I've ever had. I was planning to sell him to royalty, but as you understand how much I cherish him, he's my most valuable possession." Ahmed could see that the tradesman was stalling, trying to figure out what price to put on the horse. It was tricky because if he put a ridiculously high price, Ahmed would walk out thinking he was being played a fool. However, it would be stupid to miss the chance of overpricing a sale. After all, Ahmed agreed to pay whatever the tradesman would ask for. Any other time this little charade would amuse Ahmed, but today it only irritated him. "I asked for a price," he said with a tone that left no room for further talk. The tradesman sighed. 60 silver coins. Ahmed smiled. It was too high of a price even for such a horse as this, but arguing would cost him much more. "All right, but one more thing. I need you to take care of my mule for a few days until I get back. I assume it will be included in the price of the horse." Not believing his luck, the tradesman agreed. "Fine then." I'm going to the market to buy a few things. I'll be back in a short while. Should I prepare the horse? Yes, thank you. With that, Ahmed left. It took him an hour to sell one of the stones and buy the necessary supplies. He was relieved to see that nobody paid much attention to him. Even the jeweler assumed that Ahmed was selling some family heritage, which wasn't such an unusual thing. So without any incident, he returned to the stable where he found his horse ready and waiting for him. He paid up 60 silver coins, after which he walked to his mule, put his hand on the side of his neck and said, I'm sorry, my friend, but I have to leave you here for a couple of days. I'll come back, don't you worry. The mule responded with a nod. Ahmed turned to the tradesman. You take good care of him. I'll be most displeased if I don't find him in good health. Don't worry, master. I'll treat him like a prince's horse. 5 minutes later, Ahmed galloped out of the village at full speed. The distance he spent an hour to cover on a mule took him only a quarter of that time on a horse. And yet he was pressing harder and harder. He couldn't explain why, but he had a terrible feeling that he was too late and something bad had happened. The closer he was getting to the camp, the worse he felt. By the time he got close enough to see the camp from the distance, he was sure that his worst fears were true. So when he saw a group of men moving around the tent, he was not surprised. Pushing his horse even harder, Ahmed made it run faster. He could hear by the sound the horse made that it went over its limit and wouldn't be able to stay at that speed for very long. Dismissing that fact, Ahmed continued to push it when he finally saw that the men had noticed him. Pointing towards his direction, several men picked up their bows, and soon enough arrows started to fly towards Ahmed. The first bunch ended up nowhere near where he was, but as Ahmed was closing up, arrows started to fly closer. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right leg, but without even one glance he continued to ride at full speed. Shortly after, another one hit him in the shoulder, followed by 2 more, one in the stomach, one in the chest. He was only 30 feet away, and yet another one hit him in the chest again. A moment later, he drove through the group of men like a bull through a crowd. And while the horse was riding through, Ahmed jumped off of it, aiming at the center of the group, taking down 6 men with him. Before any raiders could understand what was happening, 10 of them were lying on the ground, torn or broken. There was nothing human in Ahmed anymore. He became like a wounded bear. With arrows sticking out of him, he started to tear apart anyone whom he could get his hands on. In the blink of an eye, Ahmed managed to kill 5 more men. When he saw his wife and daughters lying on the ground, with a terrible cry, he leaped to them and started to crawl around, shaking and hugging one after another. His cries gradually turned into an unbearable howl. Having realized that this was no man, with yells of fear, the raiders made a run in different directions, forgetting about their horses. Ahmed started to feel that life was leaving him. Mortally wounded, he fought 50 men with such force that only God could tell how many more he would kill. Seeing that he lost everything had done the trick, he sunk heavily onto the ground, and before his eyes closed forever, he saw a bright light, and with that came realization. All the terrible things that happened weren't true. It was only a bad dream, and his family is all right. His wife, as usual, was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, his daughters helping her, and his son getting ready to go to his training to become a blacksmith. With a smile on his face, Ahmed released his last breath. Atley woke up from the feeling of suffocating. At first he couldn't understand where he was, and only after he started to move did he realize he had a bivouac fall on top of him. Still feeling weak, Atley, with an effort, made his way towards the light that was beaming through the narrow gap in between the material. Once he managed to crawl out from underneath the bivouac, he got up and looked around. What he saw did not make him scream, did not make him run. It simply froze him in one place, much the same as seeing the dark man did in his dream. That very instant reshaped Atley's soul in a way that made him detached from everything that made him normal. One moment he was a boy with a boyish dream, boyish fears, and boyish reactions to the world, and the next moment he became like an empty vessel, alien to everything around, without an ability to express himself. What Atley saw would give him a shiver. What Atley saw would give shiver even to the most experienced fighter who spent most of his life dealing with death. About 20 bodies were lying on the ground. Some of them appeared in a terrible state with torn chests, ripped out throats, and ripped off arms. But that was not what captured Atley's attention. It's seeing the bodies of his family that made him the way he was. His father was lying with his face up to the sky and arrows sticking out of him all over. Not far off laid his older sister and his mother, with their dresses lifted, revealing parts of their bodies that Atle had never seen before, which, even to someone as small as Atle, gave an idea what his mother and sister went through before they died. And his little sister laid not much further from them, with her neck twisted in an unnatural position. Atle stood there looking at them, feeling nothing inside. His eyes were empty and emotionless, belonging not to the boy of 10 that he was, but belonging more on a lifeless doll. After standing like that for a few minutes, he started to move mechanically, appearing more like a device than a human being. He walked to the cart, which was turned upside down with its wheels sticking up into the air. Effortlessly, he put it into the correct position. 5 minutes ago, Atle was still weak from his fever, but now he became someone who could lift up a cart that weighed 100 pounds like an empty bag. Finding what he was looking for, which happened to be a shovel, Atle started to walk toward the bodies that were once his family. A few feet away from him, he started to dig a hole in the ground. He moved robot-like, impassive, cold, but determined. It seemed as if he could dig like that for days. He didn't breathe heavily. In fact, he hardly seemed to breathe at all. What would take a strong man a couple of hours to dig out took Atle 40 minutes to do. It was a hole 9 feet deep and 9 feet wide, and it was more than enough for 4 bodies. No animals would be able to dig them out. In any case, they wouldn't have to with all the food laying around. It took even less time for Atle to bury his family, after which he didn't bother to initiate a burial ground with anything. He just tossed the shovel aside and started walking towards the village. Some of the raiders were brave enough to come back for the horses, but what they saw made them so uneasy that none of them dared to come any closer, and so they watched the scene from the distance, whispering silent prayers. They saw a little boy walking around the slaughter field among the bodies, with unsettling disregard for the dead. And there was something funny about the way the boy was moving. Not laughing funny, but scary funny. It was like watching a ghost who had no business among the living, only among the dead, and in that respect living had no business seeing it. Very quietly, as carefully as possible, raiders started to back up, fearing that the boy would turn his face in their direction, fearing of what they might see in his eyes. Long after that day, they still talked of a ghost of a boy who came to collect his parents. I'll stop reading here.